The first car comes up, that's your turn. Second car is my turn. So that's kind of what was going on. What was keeping people out in the corners was that kind of drive-through dope dealing thing going on. But what kind of put a smash to that was, it wasn't a good idea. At the same time, if you were an enemy, you roll up acting like you're gonna buy dope, and the moment that guy rolls up to the car, you're gonna let him have it.
Hey, what's up, guys? It's another beautiful day here in Los Angeles. I've seen a lot of people asking me to show Boyle Heights, and finally I got a chance to get you people who are actually from Boyle Heights to talk about it.
My name is Ronan Gray, and I'm from Boyle Heights.
Boyle Heights resident, born and raised. Been here for 43 years. Let's see what we could let you guys know about our history.
So what's the oldest, how far back can you remember gangs being here, Chicano gangs being here in Boyle Heights?
Since I was born, my older brother got into that, and just growing up around here, seeing all the older homies that had the lowriders, and some of the great grandparents that were around during the Pachuco era, which was the Zoot riots. Speaking of that, that's like stuff in the 30s. Brings us to like our oldest gang here, and was probably one of the oldest gangs in probably our nation, which is 1939, and that's White Fence, and that would be East Side White Fence. When the project started popping up, some other gangs started coming up. One of them, of course, is VNE.
Yeah.
And we have another older gang too, it's Primera Flats, and then from there, which is another project section, would be the Pico Village. We had some old gangs there. Cuatro Flats, there's a gang out there. It was Clarence Street. It was big for a while. I don't really think it exists anymore. Another old gang was Third, Tercera. I went by Tercera. Oyo Soto. During the Zoot riots, we're having a lot of troubles with, I guess, I would say Caucasians. We would sometimes cross paths, and because we were, I guess, the minority, sometimes they would get attacked or abused and stuff like that. So I'm sure that's one of the ways where we did just started getting into groups, because there's power in numbers. And then a lot of the times too, it was in a sense too to kind of protect our neighborhood just from other elements, even within our own neighborhood. People stealing in our neighborhood was something wrong. You're gonna go steal. It's not right either, but go steal somewhere else. Don't steal from us. So a lot of it did come to do with protection and just a sense of community. And later on down, I think what started changing a lot is probably drugs introduced into that element, kind of changed that scene. It hit here pretty hard, especially a lot of the guys coming back from Vietnam. They came back with that habit, and it kind of just it flooded the community for a little bit, and it did kind of set us back, way back, as far as just prospering. There's two ends to it. There's a user, and there's the one that's trying to profit off of the situation, and it's not necessarily in an evil manner. It's just sometimes it's out of necessity. As kids, everybody's friends, and when you start sitting elementary, everybody's friends. Once you start hitting junior high, everybody kind of started branching out into their own neighborhoods. I'm from one and you're from another, and all of a sudden we were real good friends in elementary, but because we're from the neighborhoods that we're in now, whether it's where we live or whether it's family members, because you gotta understand, in this neighborhood, there's people been from the same neighborhood for 6 generations. That's gonna be your neighborhood.
Yeah.
So there are cases where, good friends ended up becoming enemies. I know of a case where it was 2 brothers, slept in the same room. They got into 2 different neighborhoods. One brother woke up, didn't wake up, but pretending he was asleep. When the other brother went to sleep, got up and stabbed him. And that's how hard the separation in some cases came because of the neighborhoods. But come high school, if you even made it to high school, which a lot of us didn't, a lot of us, some did make it to high school, some dropped out in high school. But come high school, by that time, if you were still around, by the high school era, now there was a lot of guns were being introduced in the 80s. It had a lot to do with the dope that was coming in here. More dope, more money, better guns. We went from little 6-shooters to full-on stuff that, it was military grade. But one of the first people you guys were going after was the people you knew where you lived. If you wouldn't have that hardcore of a connection to each other from the past, you were gonna be one of the first victims, and just simply because I know where you live and it's an easy target. It's like, if I know where the fish is at, gonna go get that fish, you know. And that's an impact of elementary. Junior high is kind of where everybody was joining the neighborhoods. You know, if you weren't already in a neighborhood by junior high, like in my case, I joined the neighborhood. I was 12 years old. By junior high, the people that weren't were, you know, they started joining neighborhoods, and in some cases, they created a neighborhood. Just a group of friends that weren't in their area. There wasn't a neighborhood, so they created one. In some cases, there was tagging crews, and that's something happened later on in the 90s where all tagging crews had to either join the gang or dismantle it.
Yeah, I remember that. Then a lot of tagging crews got their X3.
Yeah,
That's what happened with Cam, and I think even like the East LA Dukes too, right?
Yeah,
they were like that
a lot
too.
of, like, you know, Cam, they actually became a neighborhood, and they became for being a lot of youngsters, they became a strong neighborhood. They started taking, you know, they took over other neighborhoods. Like they took over an old neighborhood called Fickett Street. Yeah, they were called Fiqueteros. Those guys took them out like in a week, man. You know, so there's a bunch of little youngsters, but with a lot of heart, you know, and willing to go ahead and put in the work they had to put in. And they fought a lot of the older ones off. You know, a lot of the old neighborhoods fought them off and gained ground. Michigan was one
There were
of the
graffiti artists before.
graffiti
too, right?
artists were called Double Vision.
Yeah.
Michigan was called Double Vision, and then Double Vision turned into like a party crew. You know, more not so much like a disco group, but more of an MC. That's where you got the MC. It was MC Force, and it was a force of just, you know, had a couple of rappers. I can't really remember too many of them, but there was a group of rappers, and it was just kind of like a party crew in a sense, where you would go to parties, they'd kick you down some cash, and you'd go ahead and rap at the parties, and then that turned out to become a gang later on. Tiny Boys, Tiny Boys was kind of a neighborhood that started like inside a boys club, actually. It was just a bunch of guys hanging out, and they were called the Tiny Boys because the older dudes would call them Tiny Boys, you know, and they took that name and called it to themselves, you know, called them Tiny Boys. But that's another neighborhood that was it was kind of like it wasn't really a gang, but it was kind of the elements around it formed it into a gang, and they became a gang, and then they're still around. In this neighborhood, there's not so much spread out like in other areas. Here in this neighborhood, it's a few blocks. You got, you know, like if we go 1, 2, 3, 4 blocks up this way, you're gonna have one neighborhood. We go same thing here, 2, 3, 4 blocks that way, you're gonna have another one. It's kind of, your area is like 3, 4 block range. You know, some neighborhoods do have a bigger area, and a lot of it has to do with they've just been here longer. You go to other states, other areas, you know, you're gonna see groups of people. Right here, there's a thing called the gang injunction. It came a long way later anyway, where it really wasn't gonna make a difference. But what it was the city trying to stop groups of people hanging out. But the groups of people had already stopped hanging out. And the reason why here is this area was so active with gang violence that if you were smart enough to know that hanging out on the corner in a group of you, it was like a fish in a barrel. You know, it wasn't a good idea to be hanging out in the corner. You were just making it that much easier for the guy coming out here going to try and get you, you know. So people started getting wiser to that. So around here in this neighborhood, you're not going to see that. You're not going to see a bunch, because right here in this neighborhood, people for real, man, they're out here. You know, there are people out there going out hunting every day still, even how it is now, even if the violence has died down, but it's still active. There's still people going out there, and it's on a hunt, and every day, and you're hunting, and you know there's a group of 30 dudes on the corner. You don't gotta be a good shot to go ahead and hit a few. So that's kind of what killed that out. The city came way later with that idea, which it really wasn't gonna have an impact here, because already people here were already taking their stuff into the houses, into the backyards, into in an area where you're not so vulnerable out in the street, But in the 80s, there was a lot of that, and it had a lot to do with the dope dealing. You got 10 guys on the corner, everybody's selling dope. You're gonna take turns, and it's a line. The first car comes up, that's your turn. Second car is my turn. So that's kind of what was going on. What was keeping people out in the corners was that kind of drive-through dope dealing thing going on. But what kind of put a smash to that was, it wasn't a good idea. At the same time, if you were an enemy, you roll up acting like you're gonna buy dope, and the moment that guy rolls up to the car, you're gonna let him have it. That type of dope dealing kind of went down too, So then at the same time as that's coming out, that's going down, the pagers are coming out. So now, you don't got to be hanging out there so much like that. Now it's more just go ahead and page me and I'll meet you. In this neighborhood, you're brought up one way, and that's really, you getting brought up in this not giving a fuck mentality. You're not you don't give a fuck about anything really. You're not giving a fuck about your future, and you're not giving a fuck about your life. If you're giving a fuck about your life, that means you're scared. And if you're scared, then you're useless.
You ain't gonna make it right here.
Nobody wants somebody in your neighborhood if you're scared. You're out there you can't be afraid. You can't be afraid to do time. You can't be afraid to go ahead and get your life taken. You got hundreds of people thinking like that. There's gonna be no respect for law. You're not being brought up to have respect for the law. And not only that, you're being brought up not to have respect for the law, and at the same time you're seeing how the law works, and the law is very disrespectful to your people, and in some cases to your own family. You're seeing your dad getting fucking smacked around by the police, or mistreated, even your mother, because she's getting pushed back because there's something going on over here, and they're pushing her back like she's a man. That puts an animosity towards the law. You start having not your own thoughts of the law and why it makes sense to you to man, fuck the police, and that's that thing that my thing for the police would be is that you need to, it's like this, man. You give respect, you get respect. It's real simple, and it works like that with law enforcement. I have police friends, and then, a lot of them straight out, they were police because they had nothing else going on in life. They had a clean record. They didn't like where they were working. Somebody suggested, dude, why don't you go ahead and be a cop, man? You'll make this much a year. Fuck it, sign up. Same reason why a lot of the homies around here, the youngsters, they sign up for the military, because it's ain't got nothing going on, and you ain't got no other something bright looking. So this seems kind of not what you want to do, but at least it seems something safe,
Put some money in your pocket
and it
too,
seems something steady, and you're not gonna be caught up in this neighborhood right here. But as far as police go, I think a lot of it has to do with the lack of respect, and now and before, you have to understand too, before most of the law enforcement was white. Recently it's kind of starting to see your own people in that uniform, and it's kind of messed up when you do get that person that is brown and doesn't act it. They go over here trying to, I think it was Ice Cube that said, trying to show off for the white cop, and you do get that every now and then, but there is a thing where the fact that we're seeing our own people in those suits, and those people that are in those suits, some of them, like Ronan said, some of them are good cops. Some of them really do genuinely want to be a good cop, and some of them really do want to serve and protect. But the majority of them, and I say this because I can say this, and I say it because I've seen it with my eyes and I've experienced it myself. Some of them don't give two fucks. They ain't trying to. They ain't trying to protect and serve. And you see that the homie's right here shot and he's dying, and you're wondering, why you asking these stupid ass fucking questions that could be being answered later on. We're not going nowhere. These people ain't going nowhere. You could summons these people, but meanwhile, this dude right here is, he's bleeding out. So when you see scenarios like that, it does it has an effect on you, and it changes you. As an adult, you understand some of it, but when you're a child and you're seeing that, it's having a bad effect on you, and you start getting the seed planted in you, where there's just a tree of resentment growing in there towards law enforcement.
Gentrification happening right now. How do you think that's affected the gang culture in Boyle Heights?
You're getting people in here now that aren't afraid to call the police. They're not afraid to be snitches. They don't know that code. It's a code that they don't understand. So it's gonna affect a lot, because you're gonna have people willing to be witnesses to a lot of the things. So when that happens, it starts putting a lot of the homies in jail, and at the same time, it's gonna calm the area down a lot. And then not only that, a lot of the homies that do live here are renters. That's gonna push them out. So in the end, if you're an owner, if you're a homeowner, property owner here, it's gonna benefit you. And if not, you're gonna find your way. You're gonna find your way out of here, due to you're not gonna be able to afford to live here. Maybe it's gonna go full turn, where it's gonna start looking like the people that used to live here are people out there living in the Fairfax district now. And those same types are gonna, what they did to the Fairfax district is gonna be happening here. Growing up here, I did get to see a lot of Jewish. Here we had 3 Japanese families on this block, and had a few Jewish families. But come the 70s, by the 60s, 70s, it was primarily, they were all Mexican, yeah, Mexican families. There was a Polish and a Russian. They were both Jews. They were like the last of the Mohicans in this neighborhood to have left. See, they were still here in the 90s. We didn't chase the Jews out. A lot of that's like a bad. So a lot of people, some people think that because you would just think that. No, it had nothing to do with that. It had a lot to do with the banks. They weren't lending them money and stuff like that. So they were like, you know what? Fuck this place. Let's go where we can, borrow
property,
and borrow money from the bank to go ahead and get our things going. So that's the real reason why a lot of them left here. When this was a Jewish neighborhood and stuff like that, there was a sporting goods and a music store. Like, literally you wanted to buy an instrument, there was a music store, and next door was a sporting goods. A perfect example of what went on is that sporting goods and the music store, those are pawn shops now. That's telling you here, pretty much that music programs in the schools are gone. There was no reason for it. Sports programs got affected. I mean, obviously, if a sporting goods went out of business, that means a lot of the sports programs weren't prospering, I guess. And a lot of it had to do with the youngsters were getting into neighborhoods, and the youngsters getting into neighborhoods, and at the same time, to sell dope, there's no age limit to sell dope. You see your people are struggling, you need shoes, you already know you can't go ask for any, so you got to get yours, and it's a simple thing, it's there, you can get it. No one's gonna ask you for a work permit, no one's gonna hit you up for ID, none of that shit. You got $50, I need a 50 double up, and there you go. No one gives a fuck what you're gonna do with it. You're gonna smoke it as a kid, or you're gonna sell it as a kid. So that started to affect a lot of the other people in this neighborhood, as far as, instead of joining sports programs, music programs that the schools were already lacking, they started coming onto the streets because the streets had something to offer you. As far as having good jobs around here, the people that had good jobs were like maybe people that their dad, had somehow got into the city as a janitor, but you had a city job, so that means you had benefits and certain things like that. Whereas the majority here, it's a labor force, it's a workforce. You're out there. A lot of the parents, fathers are in construction or some type of gardening, or it's the workforce that the jobs other people don't want. This is the big difference in the generation gap is your Mexican parents were workers. You growing up here as a Chicano, I hate to say it, but you like, I don't know what it is, but it was just those lazy bones. You didn't have that same work ethic that your parents had, even though they try to instill it in you, But just here in this neighborhood, man, the streets call you. They call you, and you just, without wanting, it's almost kind of like a moth to a flame, and you just kind of go to it, and you just get caught up in it. Yeah, I remember growing up and seeing the homies, and a white shirt wasn't a white shirt. The white shirt had 3 creases on it, front and back. The Pendletons, everything was just the shoes. The Hush Puppies and the Stacy Adams. People out there wearing Stacy Adams, and in the daylight, not even going to church. But just kind of standing out there, looking, what they used to say, Bonnarooed up, which today would be like looking G'd up. And it was a sense of, they didn't have much, but they took pride in what they did have, and your khakis, you always try to keep them clean, your Hush Puppies, Imperial, Stacy Adams. I remember all the homies always just looking polished up all the time, and then I always, back then too, and some of them still were wearing the hats, and it was just a sense of pride that, you're coming out, and this is what you want to look at, and that came a lot from the Pachuco era. Which the Pachuco era were the big suits. I'm not sure if you remember or are familiar with it, but Pachucos it was kind of a dress code in a sense, which was for Mexican Americans, where it was just but I know in the blacks they had some of that too, where they had that, like that zoot look,
From what I know about the zoot stuff, those guys wore those baggy clothes because in the war times everything was short-handed, so it was like a thing to wear more fabric. So everything was like,
layers,
steel and all that stuff was hard to get because they were like in it just was hard to have.
Right.
So like a thing to like be boastful about your fashion was to wear baggy clothes. Because then it's like you have more money. Look, you're wasting more fabric, or you're using more fabric. You get what I'm saying? That's what I read about that. That's where that's that style. That's why their coats were real long and their pants were baggier. You know,
padded shoulders, little ties and shit with the chains. But that whole image. You know, you see it growing up. Like those youngsters were looking at the pachucos, looking at them in suits. You know, where they were the only guys in the neighborhood wearing suits. You know, with the chain and all that. And then of course, that attracted the ladies. You know, you got, you know, the pachucos had the ladies. Why? Because you know, they had the flights, the clothes, you know, the car. So growing up, you wanna, you're gonna be what you see. You know, and that's what you're seeing, so that's what you want to be. And you know, you're seeing what you're seeing, you're liking it. He's looking fresh, has a pretty girl, has a car. You know, so you start trying to become what you see. And that went on, and little by little. Of course, the coat and tie was too much. You know, that was 30s, 40s. It started changing, 50s. You know, you're kind of working with what's coming in that era. But that's one thing is that I do remember, even as a kid and growing up, even up to a certain point, kind of in the 80s, it kind of started going down. You know, but I remember 60s, 70s. You know, people just taking pride in that look, and that, you know, in that look of looking like a homie. You know, lowriders, I would say it started probably, I would say, like the 60s, and kind of the first. It's funny that the lowrider, lowriding was one of the ways they would do it, because obviously hydraulic systems and all that didn't exist. You know, so the homies, they would put like heavy stuff in the trunk. You know, cement bags, you know, just whatever heavy shit you could find to make that car, you know, lean back. You know, and that's how it was. And then later on, people started getting hip on the hydraulics game, and at that point, that's when the hydraulics, and then the new paint jobs, that's when it really kicked off. So I would say probably like by the late 60s is when you started seeing the real nice paint jobs, and fools really having like the real hydraulics, you know. But by the 70s, it was full on, you know. People, I mean, Whittier Boulevard was one of the scenes where, you know, as a kid, even as kids, people would just go out and stand on the street just to see the homies cruise, you know, because they would cruise the boulevard, and everybody was dressed up to the T, you know. Everybody was matching the car, you know. It was like it was the place to be on Fridays and Saturday nights, you know. And if you couldn't be in the car, you were next to it, and if you couldn't be next to it, then you were looking at it, you know what I mean? But you wanted to be there. A lot of things come out of a culture, like the cruising, you know, that came out too from the low riding, you know, because it's like it's a low rider, so you're not speeding by, it's slow, you know, you're just cruising. So with the cruising came that kind of stuck to this area too, because there was cruising going on all the way up into the 90s, and Whittier Boulevard was the place to be. It just went further down into Whittier because they started shutting this down, so the cruising went further east, and the cruising finally ended in Pico Rivera. That cruising was for like a good 30 years strong, you know, and the cars changed little by little, but there was always those classics, you know, that everybody loved to see, which was the lowrider. And even today, you know, everybody loves seeing a lowrider.
Yeah.
You know, that's something that this culture is very, I guess that's something that came out of here, and now it's part of the culture, you know. And I guess it's two cultures now, because you got a Mexican culture, and now you got a Chicano culture, which of course the gangs and the pachuco look, and the lowriders, and the music, the oldies, that's all part of, which is now a Chicano culture, which branched off of a Mexican culture.
Well guys, that's it for today's vlog. Thank you for watching. Big thank you to Ronin for doing this.
Hope you guys enjoyed the vlog, and you got some good information, and put whatever, let them comment on it, man. Let talk about what you know.
See the red and blue on my tail, yeah I know. Don't stop the deal, then the jail, there I go. Fizz in the stash by Black Clock. Look at the fiends and how they dream for this crack ride. I used to ride in the 90s, bearing arms, had my gang right beside me, doing what I had to do to survive. You either hope or thrive, or once the city swallow you alive.